On the 6th of December 1989, the BBC broadcast episode 3 of Survival, marking not only the conclusion of season 26, but what we now consider to be the end of the classic era of Doctor Who. Initially described as another hiatus, the show was finally axed, a fate it had narrowly avoided throughout the late 1980s, when the production office was officially closed 12 months later. After 26 years of continuous broadcasting, Doctor Who was no longer on television. A shock for many who had grown up with the show. Doctor Who had entered its wilderness years, seemingly at risk of being confined to television history. However, despite its absence from TV screens, the 1990s were anything but quiet for Doctor Who. So, let's take a look at what really happened during those wilderness years and how it reflects on how the BBC have treated Doctor Who. The Seventh Doctor era had a rocky start following the BBC's attempt to put Doctor Who on hiatus during the Sixth Doctor's tenure. Moved to a midweek slot in direct competition with the hugely popular soap opera Coronation Street, the show's ratings hit an all-time low. However, over time, producer John Nathan Turner and script editor Andrew Cartmel formulated a plan to rebuild Doctor Who with a more mature and laid narrative. Central to this was the complex relationship between the Doctor and Ace, with hints of a deeper mythology being woven into the series. By the time season 26 aired, this vision was coming to fruition. What later became known as the Cartmel Master Plan had been developing since season 24, gradually reintroducing mystery to the Doctor's origins and pushing the storytelling into a darker, more sophisticated direction. At this point, there was no plan for Doctor Who to go on hiatus. Work had already begun on season 27, which would have featured the return of the Ice Warriors, a conclusion to Ace's story, seeing her potentially join the Time Lords, and beyond that, the possible departures of both John Nathan Turner and Sylvester McCoy as the Doctor. McCoy's replacement was rumoured to be Richard Griffiths, a well-respected actor who had appeared in the cult classic film Withnail and I, and would go on to play Uncle Vernon in the Harry Potter franchise. However, during the post-production of season 26, John Nathan Turner was informed by the BBC hierarchy that Doctor Who was being put on hold. Sensing that this could become a permanent cancellation, he had Andrew Cartmel write a closing monologue for Survival, in which the Doctor reflects on his travels, a subtle yet poignant farewell that acknowledged the uncertainty surrounding the show's future. The 1990s marked the first time since 1963 that Doctor Who was no longer a fixture on television. In its absence, other sci-fi shows like Star Trek The Next Generation, The X-Files, Quantum Leap, and even BBC's own Red Dwarf stepped in to fill the void for mainstream audiences in the UK. However, for long-standing Whovians, the Doctor's adventures were far from over. Doctor Who found new life in the form of Virgin's New Adventures, a series of original novels that continue the Seventh Doctor's journey alongside Ace, whilst also introducing new companions, most notably Bernice Summerfield. What set the New Adventures apart was their mature and complex storytelling, pushing the boundaries of what Doctor Who had explored on television. These novels featured stronger language, darker themes, and even elements of violence and sexuality, things that the show, bound by BBC guidelines, could never have tackled in the same way. Initially, the books were written by authors already familiar with the Doctor Who universe, such as Terence Dicks, Andrew Cartmel, and Ben Aronovich. Over time, they also became a proving ground for future Doctor Who writers, including Paul Cornell, Gareth Roberts, Mark Gatiss, and none other than Russell T Davies, who would go on to revive the show in 2005. While Doctor Who had long existed in the novel format through Target novelizations, those were adaptations of existing TV stories. Virgin's New Adventures was something entirely new, telling original tales that pushed the mythos forward. Their success led to the launch of The Missing Adventures, which revisited past Doctors in similarly bold and sophisticated narratives. Once New Adventures provided fans with new Doctor Who stories, what about those who wanted to relive the classics? Fortunately, reruns of Doctor Who continued in both the UK and the US, keeping the show's legacy alive on television. More significantly, however, Doctor Who experienced a boom in VHS releases. Although the show had been available on VHS since 1983, early releases were typically omnibus editions, cut-down versions of stories presented as a single continuous film format. However, after the show's cancellation in 1989, the pace of releases ramped up significantly, with 10 to 15 averaging per year. Crucially, these new additions restored stories to their original episodic format, allowing fans to experience them as originally broadcast. As the decade progressed, the range expanded to include special edition releases highlighting different Doctors, box sets often featuring linked stories or themed collections. The landmark rush release of The Tomb of the Cybermen in 1992, after the long-lost serial was unexpectedly rediscovered in Hong Kong. With specialized artwork and a growing library of available stories, these releases became treasured collectibles for fans, whether they were looking to revisit old favorites or discovering stories that they had missed. The increasing number of Doctor Who home media releases, first on VHS and then evolving onto DVD format, demonstrated that, despite the BBC's decision to remove the show from television, Doctor Who was still a marketable product with a dedicated fan base. This was a glimmer of hope that the show hadn't been entirely forgotten. By 1993, Doctor Who had been off the air for nearly 4 years. Public interest had largely dwindled, with mainstream audiences moving on to other franchises. Meanwhile, devoted Whovians had to rely on those VHS releases to relive classic stories or turn to the novels for new stories. However, 1993 marked a major milestone, the show's 30th anniversary. Historically, the BBC had always put extra effort into celebrating Doctor Who's significant birthdays. For the show's 10th season, albeit celebrating its 9th anniversary in late 1972 to early 1973, fans retreated to the show's first ever multi-Doctor story, The Three Doctors. For the 20th anniversary in 1983, the Five Doctors took the concept even further, featuring multiple incarnations of the Doctor, returning companions, and classic villains. Even in the show's decline, the 25th anniversary in 1988 was acknowledged through stories like Remembrance of the Daleks and Silver Nemesis, both of which contain nods to the show's past. The 30th anniversary was different. This time, Doctor Who was no longer on television. Fans had hoped that the BBC would still acknowledge the occasion, given the show's enduring legacy and marketability. Rumours circulated that the BBC was planning a brand new Doctor Who production to mark the occasion. The proposed project, titled The Dark Dimension, was envisioned as a feature-length film written by Doctor Who historian Adrian Rigglesford and directed by Graham Harper, an experienced Doctor Who director. The story would have featured all 5 surviving Doctors, but with a heavy focus on Tom Baker's 4th Doctor, who would take centre stage. Rick Mayall was set to play a new villain, Oliver Hawkesbury, alongside classic foes such as the Cybermen and the Daleks, who would have appeared with updated designs. Unfortunately, The Dark Dimension never made it past pre-production. Several former Doctors were reportedly unhappy with their limited screen time, feeling that Tom Baker's dominance in the script sidelined their own incarnations. Additionally, budget miscalculations meant that the project quickly became too expensive, and BBC ultimately scrapped the film. Despite The Dark Dimension falling through, the BBC did mark the 30th anniversary with a special episode, but not quite what fans had hoped for. Dimensions in Time was a chaotic, hastily produced crossover between Doctor Who and the BBC soap opera EastEnders, aired as part of the annual Children in Need charity event. Whilst it featured past Doctors, companions and villains, the end product was widely regarded as a disjointed, gimmicky parody rather than a meaningful celebration of Doctor Who. The decision to integrate it with EastEnders further reinforced the idea that the BBC no longer saw Doctor Who as a serious property. Ultimately, Dimensions in Time felt like a missed opportunity, confirming that while the BBC recognised Doctor Who as a marketable brand, they didn't consider it popular enough for a full-scale revival. At least, not yet. Despite the lack of mainstream interest in the UK, Doctor Who still had powerful supporters who wanted to see it return, none more significant than Steven Spielberg. In late 1993, Spielberg, through his production company Amblin Entertainment, partnered with Universal to explore the idea of a Doctor Who revival, with a Hollywood twist. For passionate fans, this seemed like a dream come true, a chance to give the show a big-budget realisation, bringing it visually on par with sci-fi juggernauts like Star Trek. The initial proposal was a high-budget feature film, introducing a brand new actor as the Doctor. Well-known names such as Eric Idle, Joanna Lumley, Jane Seymour, and Eddie Izzard were all rumoured to be linked with the role. So far, so good. However, this ambitious vision came with significant complications. The biggest concern was that Spielberg wanted Doctor Who to be a full reboot, revisiting and reimagining previous stories with a Hollywood spin. This clashed with the BBC's vision, as they felt the proposal strayed too far from what made the show unique. Additionally, Doctor Who's complex rights situation created further problems. Whilst the BBC owned the rights to the Doctor, the TARDIS, and the overall concept, certain key elements, such as the Daleks, were controlled by the creator, Terry Nation. With multiple production companies involved, these legal hurdles made a smooth revival increasingly difficult. Faced with creative differences and rights disputes, neither side was willing to fully commit. Spielberg's enthusiasm gradually faded, and he shifted his focus back to other projects, including The Lost World and Saving Private Ryan. Once again, Doctor Who's return was put on hold. However, the fact that Hollywood had shown serious interest proved that the show still had potential on the global stage. This attempt at the revival, though unsuccessful, planted the seeds for future efforts to bring Doctor Who back. The collapse of Steven Spielberg's proposed revival could have been the final nail in Doctor Who's coffin. However, from the ashes of that failed attempt, a new opportunity arose, one that would finally bring the Doctor back to television, if only briefly. Enter Philip Segal, a British-born US producer who had built a career in film and television, working for major studios like Columbia Pictures and ABC. In 1989, he approached the BBC about working on their shows, including Doctor Who, only to see it cancelled before he could get involved. By 1991, Segal had joined Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment, where he became involved in early discussions about the potential Hollywood reboot of Doctor Who. When that project fell apart, Segal remained determined, collaborating with producer Peter Wagg on a new script that was once again pitched to the BBC. This time, though, the idea gained traction. A new proposal emerged, a TV movie that could act as a backdoor pilot, potentially leading to a fully fledged revival. Universal Studios, the BBC, and Fox joined forces, but there was an immediate compromise. While Segal envisioned this as the launch of a new series, Fox was only interested in a standalone film. Rather than opting for a full reboot, the TV movie would continue the classic series continuity. Sylvester McCoy returned as the Seventh Doctor, appearing early on in the film to establish his regeneration to the Eighth Doctor, played by the newly cast Paul McGann. Casting for the Eighth Doctor was deliberately kept British, with Liam Cunningham, John Sessions, and Anthony Head all auditioning before McGann ultimately won the role. The script was penned by Matthew Jacobs, with Jeffrey Sachs brought on as a director, both also British. However, despite these UK connections, the production itself was filmed in Vancouver, Canada, which doubled as San Francisco, the story's setting. The supporting cast featured American and Canadian actors including Eric Roberts as the Master and Daphne Ashbrook as Dr. Grace Holloway, the Doctor's one-off companion. Premiering on Fox on the 14th of May 1996 and later on BBC One on the 27th of May 1996, the Doctor Who TV movie was a visually impressive production. Gone were the flimsy sets and budget effects of the classic era and replaced by sleek visuals, CGI enhancements, and a more cinematic feel, bringing Doctor Who closer in line with its American sci-fi competition. McGann's charismatic and passionate performance as the Doctor was widely praised, and the film blended British and American influences in an interesting way. The narrative was simple yet stylish, featuring darker, more mature elements, including stylized violence and even a romantic subplot between the Doctor and Grace, something rarely seen in the classic series. However, while the production values were strong, the film lacked the depth of traditional Doctor Who, functioning more as an introduction than a fully realised adventure. Still, for many fans, it represented a promising new direction. I still remember watching the UK premiere as an 11-year-old, feeling both intrigued by the fresh approach, yet reassured that it still felt like Doctor Who. 9.9 million viewers tuned in across the UK, and whilst reactions were mixed, there was a general sense that the concept had potential. Unfortunately, the US audience didn't respond as strongly. The Fox broadcast drew only 5.6 million viewers, failing to generate the interest needed for a full series order. Philip Seagal's hopes that the TV movie would convince Fox to greenlight a new series were dashed. And so, while Doctor Who had briefly returned to television, the TV movie ultimately became a one-off experiment. Once again, the series' future remained uncertain, and fans were left wondering if or when the Doctor would return permanently. By the late 1990s, Doctor Who as a television series felt like a thing of the past. Akin to 1993's Dimensions in Time, fans were presented with 1999's The Curse of Fatal Death, a comedic parody for comic relief. While fun, it was played for laughs and hardly a sign of Doctor Who's return to serious storytelling. Yet, away from TV, Doctor Who was far from dead. The franchise was thriving in other media. Classic episodes continued to be released on VHS and later DVD, while original novels expanded the Doctor's adventures. But, from 1996 onwards, a new medium would become the primary home for fresh Doctor Who stories: audio dramas. Audio wasn't new to Doctor Who. As early as 1976, the Fourth Doctor and Sarah had starred in The Pescatons, the first original Doctor Who audio drama. The Sixth Doctor and Perry followed on in 1985's Slipback, and the Third Doctor returned in the early 90s with two radio serials, The Paradise of Death and The Ghosts of N-Space. Meanwhile, narrated audio versions of the classic TV stories were also being released. Then came along Big Finish. Founded in the late 90s, this independent company had initially produced audio adaptations of the Bernays Summerfield Adventures, a spin-off from the Doctor Who novels. But in 1999, they secured a non-exclusive license to produce a brand new Doctor Who drama featuring characters from the classic series, with original actors reprising their roles. Whilst it wasn't Doctor Who on television, audio dramas offered the next big thing. With strong scripts, returning actors, and immersive sound design, Big Finish rekindled the magic of the classic series of Doctor Who, and in many ways kept the franchise alive for fans eager for new adventures. As the 21st century began, Doctor Who was a franchise that existed everywhere except television and film. Big Finish was leading the way with new audio dramas, while the BBC focused on celebrating the show's past, releasing classic episodes on DVD that were now enhanced with behind-the-scenes features that VHS could never offer. By 2003, Doctor Who reached its 40th anniversary, and though a television comeback seemed permanently shelved, fans were treated to an animated adventure, Scream of the Shalka, featuring Richard E. Grant as an alternative Ninth Doctor. But this wasn't the true revival fans had been waiting for. Then, everything changed. After numerous failed revival attempts throughout the 1990s, the BBC announced in September 2003 that Doctor Who was finally returning to television, this time as a permanent series. Longtime fan Russell T Davies was to be at the helm as showrunner, and on March 26, 2005, Doctor Who triumphantly returned to Saturday night primetime television, with Christopher Eccleston as the Ninth Doctor and Billie Piper as companion Rose Tyler. More importantly, this wasn't a reboot, it was a continuation of the classic series, even incorporating elements from the 1996 TV movie, such as the grander TARDIS interior and subtle romantic connotations between the Doctor and his companion. Like rising from a phoenix from the ashes of the 1990s, Doctor Who was finally back, and while the show has had its ups and downs since, it's remained a mainstay of British television, captivating new generations and cementing its enduring legacy. This survival wasn't just down to the BBC, it was the result of dedicated fans who never gave up on Doctor Who during its absence from television. Was the 1990s really a wilderness for Doctor Who? In my opinion, not entirely. While Doctor Who lacked a consistent TV presence, its core fans understood that the show's potential was limitless, extending into different mediums. Sure, television is the ideal home for Doctor Who, but even after its 2005 return, the alternative ways of experiencing the show never diminished. DVDs are still getting released, often with animated reconstructions of lost episodes, while Big Finish continues to produce new audio dramas, spin-offs, and even adaptations of other TV series. What does the 1990s tell us about the BBC's relationship with Doctor Who? Despite being one of the BBC's most iconic creations, Fans have often felt that the broadcaster has never quite known what to do with it. During the classic era, budget limitations and scheduling changes often made it feel like Doctor Who was an afterthought. By the mid to late 80s, BBC treated the show almost as an embarrassment, placing it on hiatus, shifting its time slot, and ultimately cancelling it altogether. Yet, for all the BBC's neglect, it's clear they never really wanted to let go of Doctor Who. The 1990s discussions about turning the series into a joint British-American production show that the BBC wasn't willing to hand over full control. Whether this was because they saw Doctor Who as a cash cow or generally wanted to protect its identity is debatable, but ultimately they waited for the right time to bring it back, and in 2005 they finally did. Could Doctor Who have thrived under a different production model in the 1990s? Maybe. Would it have been a stronger show today if the BBC had invested more in it over the years? Possibly. Even now, many fans feel that Doctor Who is both neglected and exploited by the BBC in equal measure. But in the end, Doctor Who isn't about the BBC, it's about us, the fans. Whether watching it on TV, listening to Big Finish, or rediscovering old episodes on DVD and streaming, fans have kept Doctor Who alive in every possible format. The fact that you're here listening to this proves that the passion for the show has never faded. Doctor Who is limitless, and no matter what form it takes in the future, one thing is certain: it will endure for many more years to come. There are arguments, the pros and cons of how Doctor Who could have turned out should the BBC have sold it off, or it became a joint venture back in the 1990s. And even though they gave the show a big push on its return in 2005, you still get the feeling from a fan's point of view that Doctor Who is still somewhat neglected and exploited by the BBC today. Nevertheless, Doctor Who is with us, across many formats thanks to its fans. The likes of you listening to this video and myself who loves talking about Doctor Who all day long, and others around the world who never give up on the show despite its quality on screen, knowing that due to its unlimited possibilities, it can be endured for many more years to come, in whatever format. Tell me, what do you think? What are your experiences of Doctor Who's wilderness, and how did you carry on enjoying it? Were the BBC right to keep it off television for so long? That's assuming that they made the right choice to take it off air at all. Let me know in the comments below. But for now, it's the end, but the moment has been prepared for.